Breaking news. Russian missile brigade suffers losses after explosion in Krasnodar Krai.
This is the Deep Dive by Defense Report. Today's date is January 04, 2026.
If you want timely, in-depth military and defense reports, the kind of analysis you can actually use, then you know exactly what to do. Subscribe to Defense Reports.
I'm Maria.
And I'm Alex. Join us for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover a lot.
We really are. We've got a massive stack of source material for you today, and it covers this really complex landscape where military failures, legal battles, and yes, internal corruption are all intertwined.
That's it, exactly. And the thread connecting all of this is this uncomfortable truth about accountability in a modern war. We're going to start with what seems like a successful strike deep inside Russia.
A strike that had a really key missile brigade.
And the investigation that followed reveals this specific unit is already linked to some of the most devastating war crimes in Ukraine.
But the focus isn't just on Russian failings. I mean, we also have to look at the critical weaknesses plaguing Ukraine's own war effort.
That's right. From just, systemic chaos in Russian troop rotations on the front line,
to these deep-seated procurement scandals and, issues of transparency in Kyiv that are really challenging the trust of its international partners.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are distilling information from battlefield reports, deep investigative journalism, and legal analysis to give you the most important insights.
Our mission is to guide you through all this complexity.
So let's start with the flashpoint, the incident that kicked off this whole news cycle.
Okay, so we're focusing on an event that happened pretty far from the front lines. This was in Kramatorsk in Russia's Krasnodar territory.
When did this happen?
The morning of December 26, 2025. Around 07.4, so quite early, an explosion struck right at the entrance to the permanent location of the 47th Missile Brigade.
That unit is?
It's officially military unit number 52453. It's part of the 8th Army of the Southern Military District.
So this wasn't just some random supply depot getting hit. This was a direct strike on a critical military unit's home base.
A very direct hit. The report from the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, the DIU, confirmed that a KAMAZ military vehicle caught fire.
One of those big troop transport trucks.
Exactly, and it was transporting the unit's personnel. The report noted that both soldiers and officers suffered casualties, though, as you'd expect, the exact numbers are still unspecified.
And here is where the targeting gets really interesting. The DIU immediately stressed that this unit, the 47th, wasn't just some support group.
No, not at all. They were directly involved in planning and carrying out missile attacks on Ukraine.
They're specifically implicated in war crimes against civilians. This is a unit with, blood on its hands, led by Colonel Vitaly Bober.
Right. So hitting them deep inside Russia sends a very, very clear operational message.
And that name, Colonel Bober, and that unit number for the 47th, that's going to become really central later on, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It establishes this incredible line of attribution for an attack that happened months ago. But before we get there, we need to talk about why Russia is so vulnerable to these kinds of losses, even far from the fighting.
Because it's not just about external strikes.
Yes.
The core problem is a systemic collapse of discipline, of basic training within the Russian military itself. It just makes these units such easy targets.
And that diagnosis comes straight from their own side. We have this account published by a so-called Zed blogger, Maxim Kalashnikov. He cites a driver's diary that details the devastating reality of these untrained, chaotic personnel rotations.
It's just chilling. He highlights this catastrophic difference between breaking rules in civilian life where you might get away with it,
right,
and breaking them on the front line where ignoring basic safety is just instant death.
The anecdote he shared is it's unbelievable because the instructions were so simple. The driver was bringing new recruits forward. The life-saving order was, when the UAZ pulls up, you grab your gear and you immediately run into the woods.
Just disperse. Don't cluster near the vehicle. Exactly.
Avoid presenting a mass target for drones. It's the most basic rule.
So they all agreed. And then what did they do?
They did the exact opposite. The absolute opposite of the life-saving instruction they had just gotten. Instead of dispersing, they all huddled together. They started smoking, talking, right next to the car.
How many of them?
A crowd of 15 people, just gathered in a totally exposed location on the front line. It's a textbook target.
And the consequence was, I assume, immediate.
It was. A Ukrainian FPV drone was heard buzzing overhead, and the soldiers, they just froze. They just stood there, paralyzed by their own negligence.
Wow.
And then, boom, the explosion shattered the car, left bodies and wounded everywhere.
It's a self-inflicted disaster caused by people who, moments after getting a direct order, just couldn't follow a basic survival procedure.
Yes. And the viral phrase that came out of that whole incident, the one that sums up the whole systemic problem, is simply, "This is how we fight."
And that has to feed into a massive morale crisis. We saw this reflected in that intercepted call from the Donetsk front.
Oh, that was telling. A Russian soldier's reporting his troops are just abandoning their positions, they're pulling back.
And his commander just loses it. Threatens to classify the entire formation as deserters. This isn't just one bad unit, it's a pattern.
It absolutely is. So
Yeah.
you see this one systemic threat. Russian units basically collapsing under their own chaos, which makes them vulnerable. And this leads us perfectly to the next challenge, because the sources show Ukraine is fighting an internal threat that is just as dangerous.
That's right. The internal fight against corruption and this lack of transparency, it eats away at the war effort from the inside. It directly threatens support for the troops and, crucially, international trust.
Right. And we can start with accountability at the very highest level, their legislature. I mean, 2 years into this full-scale war, Ukraine's parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, it's still closed to journalists.
And the justification is just vague security concerns.
Very vague. The speaker, Ruslan Stefanchuk, just cites these non-specific risks. But the result is that journalists can't get into the committee meetings where the laws are actually written, or the plenary sessions where they're debated.
Which, of course, creates deep suspicion.
And that suspicion is fueled by what people are seeing. A journalistic project, schemes. They tracked several MPs arriving at these closed sessions in these just incredible luxury cars.
We're talking cars worth over $100,000.
Easily. And they're often registered to family members, which immediately suggests, a possible illicit origin of wealth. It just raises such serious questions when the country is fighting for its life.
The secrecy is one thing, but the sources really dig into a concrete, multi-million-dollar procurement scandal that directly failed the troops on the ground. We have to talk about the Lviv arsenal fiasco.
This is such a perfect example of how these deep-seated problems undermine everything. So back in October 2022, Ukraine's defense ministry was desperate for ammo.
Understandably.
They made a colossal upfront payment, $37.5 million, to a private Ukrainian company called Lviv Arsenal.
Okay, and what was the contract for?
100,000 mortar rounds, with a delivery deadline of October 2023.
And a year later?
Zero. Not one single round ever reached the front.
Wait, how does that happen? How does that much money just vanish with nothing to show for it?
It's a web of just unnecessary complexity. Lviv Arsenal wasn't making anything. They were just one of three intermediaries connecting the ministry to a real arms manufacturer in Croatia.
So they were just middlemen.
Exactly. The ministry paid Lviv Arsenal, who was supposed to pass the money through the other middlemen to the manufacturer, but the Croatian company eventually just pulled out of the deal.
Why?
Because they never got paid by the intermediary.
That is astounding. How do you pay $37.5 million up front with apparently no oversight, no due diligence on a company that's just a pass-through?
The lack of oversight is incredible. And to add insult to injury, the official who signed that contract, a man named Alexander Liev, he had to step down in January 2023. A totally separate investigation revealed he had publicly supported Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea back in 2014.
You're kidding. So a person with that kind of compromised history was overseeing this massive failed defense contract.
It just underscores the magnitude of the internal challenge. Now, the good news is there is internal pressure. The ministry's own Transparency Council asked NABU, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, to investigate.
Still, $37.5 million was paid for ammunition that never arrived. That cripples people on the front lines.
It's an ongoing, painful struggle. And now we have to zoom out again to the international legal stage, which is also, it's also experiencing some deep turbulence on this whole issue of accountability.
Right. This is about the truly extraordinary move by the United States to sanction officials from the International Criminal Court, the ICC, which seems completely counterintuitive. Why is that happening?
The U.S. imposed sanctions against 9 staff members. We're talking 6 judges and the ICC's chief prosecutor. It was because the court was pursuing investigations that involved officials from the U.S. and from Israel.
And crucially, neither of those countries are actually ICC member states.
Exactly. So the U.S. viewed these investigations as an illegitimate attempt to exert jurisdiction where they feel it has none.
And the sources detail how these sanctions, which are normally for, crime bosses or dictators, how they impacted the personal lives of these officials.
The impact has been devastatingly personal. The court's chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, who's a British national, had his U.S. visa revoked and his bank accounts were just closed.
Yeah.
Canadian judge Kimberly Prost, she was sanctioned in the latest round. She immediately lost access to all her credit cards.
That's bad enough, but there was one detail from the sources that just highlights how total these restrictions are. The Alexa moment.
Yes. Judge Prost reported that after the sanctions hit, the Amazon Alexa device in her home just stopped responding to her.
That sounds almost funny, but it's actually terrifying.
It is. It shows how deeply these financial and tech restrictions penetrate. This isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a precision-targeted financial weapon that paralyzes an entire international institution's ability to do its work.
It raises enormous questions about the future of global accountability. So when international bodies are under this much pressure, how do we confirm facts and enforce accountability on the ground? Let's turn back to the information war.
Well, Russia is still relying heavily on what you could call unpersuasive claims. For instance, they pushed these huge allegations of a massive drone attack targeting President Putin's Valdai residence around December 28th.
But nobody seemed to be buying it, right? There was no social media video, which is almost unheard of for a major attack inside Russia these days.
Right. The Institute for the Study of War, ISW, they called the claims unpersuasive. U.S. and Lithuanian officials also cast doubt on it. It just felt like disinformation.
And you contrast that with what we know for a fact.
Yeah. In stark contrast, yeah. Confirmed Ukrainian long-range strikes have been continuous and effective. We have documentation of strikes on strategic energy targets like the Afitsky oil refinery, the Ilsky refinery, Novokubishevsk.
And this is where that open source intelligence comes in, with satellite imagery.
Absolutely. We saw clear confirmation, scorched areas, blast marks at the Afitsky refinery back in November. These are real verified strikes on strategic infrastructure.
And this brings us full circle, right back to the 47th Missile Brigade, the unit that got hit in Krasnodar.
Yes. And it connects them directly to the legal battlefield through a specific devastating war crime, the June 27, 2023 Kramatorsk attack.
The attack on the Ria Lounge. It claimed 13 lives, including the Ukrainian author and war crimes investigator Victoria Amelina. The NGO Truth Hounds did a meticulous forensic investigation.
Their first step was critical. Pinpoint the weapon. Ukrainian officials at first suggested it was an S-300 or maybe an Iskander-M ballistic missile, but the analysts determined it was an Iskander-K.
Okay, what's the difference? Isn't it Iskander an Iskander?
Not really, and this is a major forensic breakthrough. Think of the Iskander-M like a fast, high-altitude baseball. It's ballistic, drops almost vertically, leaves a huge, deep crater.
Okay.
The Iskander-K is more like a low-flying, tricky glider. It's a cruise missile. It flies horizontally before impact.
And the crater depth gave them the answer.
Exactly. The crater in Belenki was small, less than 2 meters deep. That's characteristic of the shallower impact angle and smaller warhead of the Iskander-K. They also found debris fragments specific to the cruise version. Once they had the weapon, they could trace the launch unit.
And that's where the 47th Missile Brigade comes back into focus.
Yes. Based on the missile's southeasterly flight path, eyewitnesses saw it coming from the direction of Bakhmut. And crucially, using unit deployment data, Truth Hounds concluded the most likely perpetrator was the 47th Missile Brigade.
So the same unit that got hit in Krasnodar is the one that very likely fired the missile that killed 13 people in Kramatorsk.
It's a direct line. And the evidence strongly suggests this was an indiscriminate attack, a war crime, despite Russia claiming the target was military.
And there was that disturbing detail about the informant.
That really reinforces the indifference to civilian life. A detained GRU informant had secretly filmed the people at the Ria Lounge, including a couple with a child, hours before the strike. But the informant was at home when the missile actually hit.
So the attackers knew civilians were there, they had the video, and they fired anyway.
Total and utter indifference toward the potential civilian victims.
Wow. Okay, so what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've looked at Russian systemic failure, Ukrainian corruption, paralyzed international courts, and forensic intelligence confirming unit accountability.
It means that the integration of modern technology, specifically open source imagery and geospatial intelligence, GeoINT, is fundamentally redefining accountability. And it's doing it in real time.
We saw how satellite imagery was crucial in documenting things like the Bucha massacre after the fact.
Right. But now, that same technology, driven by groups like Truth Hounds, isn't just confirming massacres retroactively. It's verifying destruction and identifying the likely launch units almost instantly.
as we saw with the pinpoint attribution of the 47th Brigade to Kramatorsk.
And this huge shift from years of investigation to near-instant evidence, it raises a really provocative thought for you to consider. If military units are being identified just weeks after an attack, and those same units then face retaliatory strikes deep behind the lines, how does this new era of near-instant accountability change the entire strategic calculus for military commanders operating today?
A profound question for a new and rapidly evolving era of conflict. You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Arya, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the sources.
And remember, subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.